Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us in our winter breakout session, our second day of sessions. And today we're going to talk about hypothesis and using social annotation, specifically in Brightspace. Christy DeCarolis, am I saying your last name correctly?
Yep, that's correct.
Is a representative from Hypothesis. So she's going to take us through a little bit about what Hypothesis is, what uses we might use it for. I'll jump in and share, how I've used this tool in my classes. And then hopefully we'll have a pretty good sense of how to use the tool and then how to implement it in the LMS. Maureen, did you have a question?
Yes, just a quick question.
Yeah.
I used Hypothesis in Blackboard, and
Yes.
I found that it was not very seamless. And as a quick question, I wondered if Christy, you could speak to whether this is very like that or if this is much different in terms of seamlessness.
Were there particular pieces that you found were kind of like presenting roadblocks for you in Blackboard?
It seemed like at least in the case where my students were sort of producing their own text to then annotate, that everything had to be sort of downloaded, turned into PDFs, uploaded, and there were like multiple steps in the uploading. It really took a lot of time. So I didn't know if that was still true.
Yeah, so if you want students to be able to annotate each other's work, that would still be the process.
Okay.
So most of the use cases I'm going to talk about today more so involve like the instructor sharing a particular reading and then the students collaboratively discussing the reading that the instructor is sharing and not so much commenting on each other's work, which can be a bit labor intensive to set that up. Does that address the question? Okay. Yeah. So I did drop the link to the slides in the chat here. And obviously we're a small group. So if you have any questions throughout the session, please feel free to either just unmute and ask or put them in the chat, whatever is easier for you. So I'm going to go through a couple things today. It sounds like some people are familiar with Hypothesis, but I'll give a brief introduction about, what Hypothesis and social annotation is. We will work to look at what it looks like to annotate a document and how to set up the Hypothesis enabled reading in Brightspace. And then I will also talk about some different ways you can use it in your class. So I'm an adjunct for Rutgers University, and I'm prepping my class starts next week. So I'm trying to get my Hypothesis readings together as well. So some of it I'm like, it's just kind of floating through my head for that reason. So if you don't mind, I know that Maggie probably knows most of you on the call, but obviously I am not familiar with everyone. So if you could just put, I know you're all from SUNY, so if you could just put what you teach and if you have any experience with Hypothesis in the chat, that would be super helpful for me. Just so, if everyone already has some experience, I'm not talking about things you already know, or if some people are brand new, I'm not, brushing over things I shouldn't be brushing over. So I'll just give you a moment for that. Okay, so it sounds like Lisa and Maureen have had experience with Hypothesis. Oh, very cool, Eric, a Rutgers graduate. Yes, so that's great. So as Maggie said, my name's Christy DeCarolis. I am the customer success manager for all of the SUNY schools actually and Hypothesis. So basically, if there's anything that you need assistance with using Hypothesis, I'm always happy to help. Brainstorm assignment ideas, get it set up in your course, whatever I can do. Before I came to Hypothesis, I was actually an instructional designer at Rutgers for 8 years. So I worked at Rutgers for a long time. And I still do adjunct courses there. So I've been using Hypothesis since 2019. So I was using Hypothesis for a couple of years before I actually joined here. And I just really like the tool a lot. So now I'm here and hoping I can help you all incorporate it into your courses as well. So since Eric's not familiar and some people who are watching the recording might not be familiar, I do want to just kind of take a quick look at what Hypothesis looks like in Brightspace and what it actually looks like to annotate. So I'm going to go over to my Brightspace instance. So this is the Hypothesis version of Brightspace, so it might not look exactly the same as your SUNY version, but hopefully it's not too different. And I have some readings set up here. I'm actually going to click on this one faculty focus article that I had some people annotating. So basically what Hypothesis lets me do is take my readings that I have loaded into Brightspace, and then I can open up the reading and, oh, that is looking very funky. I wonder why. I wonder if there's something going on with the website. So let me try with something that does not link to a website. Oh, apparently that's linked to the same website. Okay. I call this participation reading, but it is not. The article is, it was the article I was trying to get to here. So as I was saying, sorry about that. I have my reading on the left-hand side, the reading that I want my students to do. And then on the right-hand side of the screen, Hypothesis basically adds this annotation sidebar on the right-hand side. And as I kind of scroll through the reading, you'll notice there are highlights on the reading. And each of those highlights is associated with a particular annotation. So as I am hovering over the annotations on the right, you can see which pieces of text they're connected to on the left. So the annotations are anchored right into the text, and the students are applying to specific portions of the text. You'll also notice that there are, and there's an option to show replies. So each of the students has, or each of the annotations has an option to reply to it, and it creates kind of a threaded discussion right over the reading. So you're having a discussion about the reading while the students are doing the reading, and they can either connect their annotation to the text itself or to another student's annotation. So that's kind of the basics of what we can see here. If I wanted to add another annotation, I could just select the text that I want to annotate. Once I've selected it, then I could click on the annotate button. And then I have the option to add my annotation. So this is not a very good annotation, but once I have added my thoughts in my annotation, I would click the post to Hypothesis and it would post my annotation within the conversation here. So that's kind of just the basics of what it looks like to annotate with Hypothesis. I did kind of specifically mention to click the post button just because sometimes students don't realize they have to click post. They think it's like auto saves, and it does not. You do have to click the post to save the annotation. But that's the basics of what it looks like to annotate with Hypothesis. We like to say here at Hypothesis that it makes reading active, visible, and social. So it's kind of forcing students to engage with the reading in a way that is more active than they might do so otherwise. So they have to think about the reading, consider their response, maybe think of questions that they have. It makes reading visible in that to you as the instructor, so you can see what the students perhaps have questions about or what they have misunderstandings about. A lot of times I hear faculty saying that what the students don't annotate is pretty instructive to what they might be having trouble with. And it also makes reading social in that it makes reading a more collaborative experience and not an isolating experience. So students can see what their classmates are saying about the reading, how their classmates are reflecting on the reading, and then even if their classmates have the same questions about the reading. And I do have some links to resources in the slide deck. So I had put that link in the chat. Some things that could be helpful to give to students are the annotation tips. And then if you want them to add different types of multimedia to their annotations, which we'll talk about in a little bit, there's some instructions for that as well. So before we get into kind of the nitty-gritty of setting things up in Brightspace, I want to briefly introduce why it is convenient to use Hypothesis in Brightspace. So as you saw here, the students are signed in automatically. They don't have to create accounts or do anything special to access Hypothesis. Basically, they would just access their reading that you have linked within your Brightspace module. And once they open the reading, they can start annotating. They don't have to do anything extra for that. You will also have a private group created for your courses. So, you know, the students are just annotating with one another. There's also a good integration with the grade book in Brightspace, so you can grade students' annotations right in Brightspace. If you do want to grade them, it's an option. You don't have to. And then we also now have an option to use small groups with the Brightspace group sets. So if you want students to annotate in smaller groups, then you can have them do that. The default is that, as you saw here, you know, my whole class is annotating together. So that would be the default setting. Everyone in your class would be reading together and seeing each other's annotations. But for people who perhaps are annotating very short documents or annotating with many students, you can break them up into smaller groups and have them annotate in smaller groups. So I just want to pause and see just about the annotating basics. Does anyone have any questions or thoughts about that before I move on into the details of how to actually set it up in Brightspace?
I have a quick question, Christy.
Sure.
I know that the annotation itself is the objective. Do you ever create assignments that allow students to sort of reflect on or synthesize the annotations, what they do, what they see, anything like that?
Yeah, so that is a good question. I am trying that for the first time this semester, actually. I'm having them annotate a document the week prior to doing a project, and then they're going to reference the annotations as part of their project and what other students have said. I've also heard of faculty having students, if they teach face-to-face classes, which my class is online, so it's a little bit different, but people will have face-to-face classes, will have the students in the first 2 or 3 minutes of class kind of pair up and review the annotations together and look for common themes or, you know, different topics that stood out the most. I also have, we have a Hypothesis educator forum that we just started in Slack. So I think the link to that is at the end of this slide deck. So I can link to that as well, where people have been sharing ideas. And there's been, I just want to find it because I don't want to misquote what this person said. They said they're going to have students remix their annotations. I just really like the way she said this. A first-year composition course. She is having the students do a close reading essay assignment and then choose several annotations from an assignment and remix them into an infographic or another modality to aid students. So I thought that was a really interesting idea as well, to have students return to their thoughts and kind of create something new with them. So
Thank
that was
you.
a little all over the place, but just some ideas.
I like that.
Any other questions or thoughts? Okay, so before I get into the details of Brightspace, I just want to review a couple things about what you can actually annotate and what you can put in annotations. So as of right now with Hypothesis, you can annotate publicly available online articles. So that was the faculty focus article I was just demonstrating. That is just a public facing website. So anything that doesn't have a paywall, you can link to Hypothesis. You can annotate PDFs. So if a article is behind a paywall, you would want to save that as a PDF and have the students annotate that way. Open textbooks and open educational resources, whether that is a PDF version of a textbook or an online version, they can be brought into Hypothesis. And right now we are piloting integrations with JSTOR and with VitalSource Bookstore. So we're hoping to expand options into other library databases and e-text options as well. These are kind of just our starting points. So that's not available at every school yet, but we are piloting it with some schools right now.
And I'll add that if you are interested in providing a chapter from like a book that you own for students to annotate, there are, resources around campus. I use the library's scanner that has the ability to scan the book chapter into an OCR PDF. And so there is, ability to do that too.
Subject to copyright law.
Right. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Maggie. And then what can you put into an annotation? So this really depends on what you want your students to be doing as far as annotation goes, what your purpose for annotation is. I found that students kind of default to annotating with text. If you don't tell them these other options are there, at least in my experience, my students have not just found the ways to add these other things. But they can annotate with text. They can add images to their annotations. They can embed videos using YouTube or Vimeo. I don't think we had any STEM faculty here, but they can add LaTeX equations. And then they can also use links and tags with their annotations. So I actually wasn't aware of some of these before I came to Hypothesis, and I am going to be promoting students adding these different options into their annotations this semester, just because I'm excited about the prospect of a more multimodal experience for reading. So some students, are strong in reading text, and others might do better if they can link it to an image, or if they can connect it to a YouTube video that explains the concept in another way. So bringing in the opportunity for outside resources that are in different modalities could help better student understanding as well. So there's in a couple places on the slide deck, links to help docs. So I would just point the students to the help docs on adding links and images and adding videos to annotations, because like I said, it's not difficult to do. It's just not something that the students necessarily notice that they can do or realize that something they might want to be doing. Maggie kind of mentioned this earlier. One thing to note about PDFs is that they do have to have optical character recognition on the PDF. They do have to be accessible. So if you have scanned a textbook or an article using a scanner that does not have OCR, and you can't select the text on that article, we do have a website that can add that OCR layer for you. So it's linked here. If your text does not have the accessible optical character recognition layer, you would want to just convert that using the website first and then use it with Hypothesis, or else Hypothesis won't know there's any text to select.
Christy, how complex is it to do that? If I recall, that was multi-step when I did that last.
So the OCR is basically it's like the simplest looking website, because you just load your file in here, and then it will give you, once it's finished, an option to download it. So then you would download the new file to your computer and then add that to the Hypothesis assignment.
That looks easier.
Yeah, the OCR process itself, if you're using this website, is not too difficult. I know that there's also options to do it in other programs like Adobe Acrobat that might be like many steps. So there's a trade-off there. If your scan is pretty high quality, this website should be fine. If your scan is not very high quality, if it's like very like, if it's not straight or if the text is a little bit funky looking, something like Adobe Acrobat will probably give you a better result. So there's a little bit of a trade-off, but this is pretty simple. All right. And then I do want to just preface me talking about how to do this in Brightspace, that all of the things I'm going to go over are linked with videos and written instructions here. So, I know just watching someone go through this once or twice is not like, oh, I'm going to get how to do this amazingly now, but all the resources are here as well. Thanks for joining, Lisa. Let me know if you have any questions. Oh, I think she already left. I'm talking to no one. All right, so so to go through hypothesis in Brightspace. So in order to add a reading, I'm going to navigate to the module that I want to add it to. And then I'll want to click on the existing activities button, which is a little bit not intuitive, but that's where we want to go. And then we'll click on external learning tool. So I'm going to scroll down. Any hypothesis assignments you've already added will show up here. I have lots of them. So I'm going to scroll down to the bottom and I'm going to select create new LTI link. So you'll actually want to do this every time. So you'll scroll past any hypothesis assignments you already have and click create new LTI link. And then you could put in the title of your assignment. So say I want my students to annotate my syllabus. I can put in my syllabus annotation assignment title. Here, I just need to go to this website, which is linked in our slide deck. I just need to copy a URL from our website in this portion. So it's nice to have this handy. I'm going to paste this into the LTI URL here, and pasting that URL will bring up the hypothesis tool. So now that my basics are set up, I can click create and insert. And that's going to make a link to the assignment. And you're probably thinking, okay, Christy, but you didn't actually add a reading anywhere. That's true. I'm going to do that next. So to add a reading, I can click on the assignment itself. And then I have a couple of different options here. I can enter the URL of a web page. I can select a PDF from Google Drive or OneDrive. So I am going to, oops, I'm clicking on the wrong stuff. I'm actually going to select a PDF from Google Drive, just because that is what we use here at Hypothesis. I am going to find a file because I haven't actually uploaded my syllabus PDF to my Google Drive yet. I do have the option to load it in from my computer. So I'm going to upload my syllabus. And then at this point, if I did want to make my assignment a small group assignment, I could select the group from Brightspace now, but I don't want to do that. I'm going to just make this a full class assignment. So I'm going to click continue. And once I have added the syllabus PDF or whatever reading you're using, now my hypothesis annotations are ready to go. I do want to point out there's just one little difference you'll notice between this reading I had set up prior and this current syllabus assignment. So this reading has a grading toolbar at the top of the page, and my current assignment doesn't have that. And that's just because I haven't enabled the grading for the assignment yet in Brightspace. So I mentioned that you can grade annotations, but it's not automatically enabled. It's something that you can choose to do. So I'm going to actually go back to my Brightspace tab. And at the bottom in this section, I have the option to add a grade item if I want to do that. So I'm going to add a new grade item. And create that. And save. And then once I open this again, now I will have this grading bar option at the top. Now that I've enabled the grading. You might notice that I had entered my grade as out of 100 points, but it's showing up to grade it in the upper right here is out of 10. So just note that the hypothesis grade bar will always display out of 10 instead of out of 100 or out of whatever the point value you put in. But the point value you enter for your assignment is still what it will be in the grade book. It will scale. So if I put in a score of 9 out of 10 for a student here, it would show up in the grade book as a 90 out of 100. Maureen?
I was just curious about, I haven't used the grading function in the past, so I see it's set for all students. You wouldn't want to give grades publicly, so do you just alter, how do you make sure that?
So yeah, that's a good question. This is a confusing view. This is just showing the annotations I'm looking at is basically it's setting my view. I can't actually set a grade for all students. Let me see another. I don't know why this one is looking so weird, but here, once students have annotated, your dropdown will show those names, and then you can select a specific student to filter those particular annotations.
Oh,
And
nice.
once those annotations are showing, you could enter a grade for the student, and it would just go to that individual student at the top.
Great, thank
And
you.
I could go on, and filter through that way. It's just, yeah, because I don't have any annotations, it's not showing me any students yet. Any other questions or thoughts about using the grading?
I just have a quick question. So when we're setting it up in our Brightspace instance, when you're creating the link for an assignment and you enter in that URL, the tool that comes up is the legacy LTI tool. And so I just wanted to clarify if that was if that's different than the one that showed up for you, and then what the differences are, between those.
Sure. So I will confirm with my support team why that is occurring. Let me just
because I'm wondering if that's why, I don't see
Pretty much
like
all
a
the LTIs are legacy LTIs in our instance.
it might be the fact
and
that
that's the SUNY, that's a
I don't-
SUNY thing. Perhaps.
it might just be that we recently upgraded from LTI 1.1 to LTI 1.3, and I'm not
Okay.
sure. I just wanted to check if that could potentially be why, if y'all are still on
Okay.
1.1. Functionally, it's exactly the same for your end. It's just different like back-end security measures.
Gotcha.
But I can look into that too. Maureen?
Sorry for all the questions. I think one of my concerns is I'm not sure at all where I would find that else. Like you said, make sure you have this open and so you can have the link handy. I don't have any confidence that I could reproduce that.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I am going to put this link. It's under step 3 of this website on these instructions. I'll put it in the chat. It's also on this first bullet.
Okay, thank you.
If you click on that link, it's this step 3 there. It has listed.
Thanks so much.
You're welcome. No, and the questions are really good. So please do not apologize for having questions. All right, so any other questions about Brightspace or using Hypothesis in Brightspace before we get into some ideas of how to use it in your class in different ways? So, cool. So some different ways you might want to consider using hypothesis in the classroom. I just want to highlight that sometimes people think hypothesis works best in fully online classes, or I always find that people who teach it like one way always think it works better the other way. I don't know why, it just always happens like that, but I think it works well for both types of classes. So in face-to-face classes, the big thing I've heard from faculty is that it helps make their in-class discussions more engaged and more active, because the students are kind of held accountable for doing the reading, and they also have to like anchor their thoughts to specific text in the reading that they can then reference. So I know some faculty who actually do bring up the annotations as part of like the, what's going on in the front of the room at the beginning of class, and use that as a springboard for their class discussion. So they'll use that to like call on students and drive the class discussion and answer specific questions. And then I mentioned earlier in response to Maureen's question that opening with an annotation summary activity at the beginning of class might be a good idea to have students revisit their annotations and kind of get back into the mindset of that particular reading as they're getting started for the class for the day. And then in fully online classes, it works very well too. Like I mentioned, I teach fully online, and I often wish that I had the face-to-face space to bring the annotations back into to talk about. You can really replace your discussion boards with hypothesis in fully online courses. This is what I've done. I didn't do that in the beginning, but feedback from my students indicated pretty early on that they enjoyed the hypothesis assignments and felt they learned from the hypothesis assignments, and they did not feel that way about the discussion boards. And I also just think it's really important in online courses that students feel that they're part of a community still, and that annotation space lets them kind of create that learning community. I mentioned this earlier with my example assignment that I set up. It is a great idea to start by having your students annotate the syllabus. There's a number of reasons why I like starting the semester with this assignment. One is that I think it is a good way to have students practice using hypothesis as a tool before they're like officially reading like a dense course text. So they kind of get practice with the tool, and they're also reading the syllabus, which is something we always want them to do. And I want to point out here that at the top right-hand portion of the slide, this is actually a link to sample instructions that we have for a syllabus annotation assignment. So if you want to grab these instructions and put them into your course, you can either steal them as they are, or you can like adapt them to what might work for your course. So that is actually the syllabus I loaded into this assignment is what I am having my students annotate next week. One other popular method that I have heard from faculty is to use annotations to guide the students through the reading. So it's somewhat common practice for faculty to go in and pre-annotate a document. So they will add their own annotations with questions, or like if they want to point students to specific points in the reading and kind of guide the students reading that way. And it's also a good opportunity to model annotations and what you're expecting from students. So I was actually talking to a chemistry professor yesterday who primarily does this type of annotation assignment. She'll go in and add questions to the annotations beforehand and guide her students through what they should be focusing on and what they might have questions about that way. And then another alternative use of hypothesis is to kind of go the opposite route and just leave the reading as like a blank slate. So opening the reading up for a more seminar style discussion. This is what I do for most of my readings in my gender and technology course that I teach. I kind of just leave it as a generic like go in and annotate this document. And I don't give them specific questions to be answering. So it really depends on, again, like what your purpose for annotation is, what types of readings the students have, but there's a lot of different ways that you can approach the assignment that are successful. And we do have different examples of instructions linked to each of the slides here. Another example is to have students annotate your lecture or really any other types of course documents. So I think that's not something that people typically go to as the types of things they want students to annotate from the get-go, but it gives a good space for students to ask questions and clarify things. I'm actually going to have my students, I'm doing a new project for my second unit in my course this semester, and I'm going to have my students annotate the project instructions just because I want to make sure it's a little abstract and I want to make sure that I've explained things clearly. We can like nail down some of the questions before they actually get into the project. So I think using different course materials and giving students a different space to ask questions could be helpful as well. And then we have on this slide a link to all of the annotation assignment examples on our site. So we have just like more general annotation assignment instructions, and then instructions for specific course documents, and lots of just things to get you started here. And then I just want to remind you all, SUNY Oswego is part of our partnership program, so you do have access to a couple of different resources through that. You do have access to me. So if you need assistance, this links to my calendar. So you can always schedule time with me to either brainstorm how you might use Hypothesis, or if you just want to walk through getting it set up in your course. This Hypothesis Educator Forum is what I had mentioned a little bit earlier. It's a Slack community where people have been brainstorming how they're using Hypothesis in their courses across institutions. So there have been a lot of really cool ideas floating around in there. And then our support team is also available if you ever have any technical issues as well. We also have workshops on different topics every week on Tuesdays at 1 p.m. Eastern. So you can, this link to our registration page will take you to all of our different topics that are available if you want to check out any of those workshops that are coming up for the spring semester. And my email is here if you have any questions, but I just realized, Maggie, I was just like, I got into presentation mode. I meant to totally ask Maggie how she uses Hypothesis in her own class so she can share what she has done in her own course as well. Because I know it's always great to hear examples from other faculty. Do you mind talking a little bit about that, Maggie?
Yeah, so I would have to go back and see when I started using Hypothesis, but I think it's been a couple years at least now. And I've used Hypothesis primarily in my face-to-face courses, and of course when we were remote for most of our teaching in my online courses in that event as well. But I found that it's been a really useful tool in my face-to-face courses and keeping students accountable to their readings and getting them prepared for the discussions that we are about to have that week. So I typically, when I set up my readings, I set them up usually at the very beginning of the semester for most all of the modules, and assign those readings and a series of annotations. Usually I require a certain number of annotations for my students, and I have those annotations due prior to coming into class. So that gives students kind of an incentive to get prepared for class, to think about some of the discussion points. Recently, I've been teaching more senior seminar style classes. And so I've, been, happy to, have smaller class sizes for this. So I haven't used the groups as much, but it is something that I'm interested in doing, especially when, I'm trying to scale, to larger class sizes. I've done annotations, or I've done hypothesis enabled readings in classes of 30 to 40 students, and it does start to get a little messy in the document. And so I think it would be, that seems to be a really helpful tool to keep some of that discussion a little more coherent for each student, and keeps those small groups that we have established in class kind of persisting throughout other work in the class. And so I'm looking forward to using that as well. So mostly I use it to help students prepare for class discussions using the readings, but I've also used it. I know John has used it too, and so he might want to share as well, for peer review, which I know Maureen, you had talked about, when you're creating these assignments for students to give feedback on their own work, it is a lot of labor to, make sure you're downloading, their assignments as PDFs, uploading them into individual links, for the students to access. But what I really like about that is I can have multiple students annotate multiple, projects. And so I usually kind of assign, those responsibilities to each student. So they'll be not just exchanging papers like one-to-one, but they'll be, responsible for giving feedback on 3 students' work. And so that, kind of creates, I think, a little more, it gives the students who are receiving the feedback a lot more detail about their work and from different perspectives. So I think it does tend to work out really well. But it does take a bit of time and planning to make that happen. You had a question, Maureen?
Yeah, Maggie, I'm sorry. You mentioned the tool you were thinking about using to kind of cut down on the messiness. Is that the group assignment?
Yeah,
tool?
yeah,
Okay.
Christy kind of had shown that, when you're enabling when you're uploading the document or you linking to the document, it gives you the option of having this be like a group assignment. And then if you have set groups already established in your Brightspace, you can select those particular groups to, then assign your, create those, groups for the reading.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, so I can just briefly show that really quickly because I know I didn't really go over, I have too many tabs open, the groups situation. But so if you have, the one thing with the hypothesis readings, if you do want to use one of your hypothesis enabled readings with Brightspace groups, you'll want to get those set up first before you create the assignment. Or else when hypothesis goes to grab the groups, it'll be like, you don't have any groups in this class. Like, I don't know what to use. So I already have some groups here. If I wanted to create my, new group set, I could say, I want a certain number of groups, or I can say, maybe I want 5 students in each group or something like that and have Brightspace create it for me. But I'm going to, I only have like a few people on this site, so I'm just going to make 2 groups. And then once I create that, then I have my syllabus annotation group category. Then I can go back into my content and set up my hypothesis reading. Oops, I'm going to go into existing activities, external learning tools. So this process will be the same as what I just did. I will grab that, close out my tabs so I know what I'm doing. Grab this URL again.
And I bookmark that to my browser so that it's always there. And if you're working, within a class and you're setting up multiple readings in that class, it should come up as soon as you put the clicker into that LTI because you've been using that
Like
window.
your browser recognizes it.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm getting a page not found when I drop that link into my Chrome browser.
I apologize. I think I accidentally put the wrong, it's this into the chat. That's the link you actually want to insert into the in the Brightspace assignment. So once I choose my documents, if I do select the groups, let's try this again. I think I've done something to confuse it. That's really strange. I don't know why I was able to do this before and I'm not now. I will just enter this URL just so I can continue demonstrating and see what's going on with that. So I can select this as a group assignment, and then it will find the different group categories that are available in Brightspace. So you could theoretically use like the same groups every time, or you could mix up the students if you wanted to. Once I actually get this set up, the main difference is that on the instructor end, now at the top of the annotation sidebar, it's a drop-down menu, and you can navigate between the different groups as the professor and see the different annotations in each group. The students will only see their group, but you can toggle back and forth.
If you wanted to grade them, is it the same mechanism? I mean, you can give a group grade, right?
No, so for this, you would still give individual
You would. Okay.
grades, yeah. All right, so I think we're coming up on time. Maggie, right? This ends at 50.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So does anyone have any final questions as we hit the last couple minutes?
I do, but I keep asking questions. I want to see if Eric has questions. No. Okay, so big question. I want to have students work in the Library of Congress on some archives from the 1930s. But I've just discovered many of the interviews, the oral histories, have been compiled in large documents. So the PDFs might be a couple hundred pages long. That seems like it doesn't seem like a good fit exactly for hypothesis. So would this create problems?
It shouldn't. But you can also, if you download those documents and then just when you go to, you can, I don't know, my brain's like not letting me finish the sentence, so I apologize. What you can do is, if I wanted to like save this website as a PDF, I'm trying to think if I pull up.
It allows me to create PDFs on the Library of Congress site. So that's
Yeah,
not the
so
problem.
if you download that PDF, let me just toggle my screen share really quickly. So, oops. So say I have why? All right, sorry, my Zoom is being a little funky. I have this PDF I want to use, but say I only want students to annotate the first 3 pages. Right. I could go to print the PDF, and instead of choosing a printer, there's usually an option where I can like save as a PDF or something and say, I just want to say pages 1 through 3, and then save it. And then that should give you whatever like page range you want them to use. You should be able to just save that out of the larger PDF.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful. Appreciate it.
All right. Well, I think Maggie has these slides, and yeah, so you have my email, you have the slides. If there's anything else that I can do, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'd be happy to help everyone.
Thank you so much.
Yes,
thanks for having me.
Wonderful.
Yeah, very helpful, Christy. Thank you. Thank you, Maggie. Awesome. Hi, John.
Thanks, Maggie and John. It's good to see you, John. I've spoken with Maggie before. I've not seen John in person, so in person. All right. So thanks, everyone. It was nice to meet you all.
Bye now.
Okay.
Bye.